Okay, we're continuing with the quotes. This is George Saunders. He's a writer, and he has a couple good lines about writing. He says, satire is a way of saying, I love this culture. To satirize something, you have to know it well, and you probably have to like it or even love it in order to study it that much. You're sort of honoring it with your attention. And he says, when you're writing, entertainment and engagement come first before any intellectual stuff. There has to be reader engagement. They have to want to turn the page and keep going. Writing is really just the process of charming someone with prose, to compelling them to want to keep reading. How do you keep the reader reading? Well, you have little entertainment, bursts of pleasure with jokes, good metaphors, and, useful information. The way I describe it is it's infotainment, information and entertainment is what good writing should be. And whenever I write, I just think, what would I say to my friend? Okay, a smart friend. How would I talk to him? And people say, well, you make it too complicated. Oh, bullshit. Stupid people don't read me. Only smart people read me. So I don't care about stupid people. Most of them are all functional illiterates. So I just write for what an intelligent friend would want to hear. And you say, well, why do you write towards a friend? Because they're the only persons who read me. People who don't like me, they're not going to read my book. It's going to be somebody who likes the way I communicate. And that just makes it so much simpler. I just write as if I'm talking to an intelligent friend, and everything goes from there. Because I routinely will, talk on the phone briefly like one of my doctor buddies, okay? And we'll talk about some medical topic, nutrition topic, whatever. And I would just take that, make that into a video, make that into a book chapter. Okay, humor is what happens when we're told the truth quicker and more direct than we're used to. The goal of the writer is to keep the reader reading. A story is a conversation between equals. We keep reading when we feel respected by the writer. Be specific. Always be escalating. That's what you do in a novel, verisimilitude with suspense. But I'm not a suspense writer. I'm more of a nonfiction, humor, and aesthetic beauty type of writer. I love all the art and philosophy and all that stuff. Writer's job is to provide enough micro moments, pleasure bursts, if you will, laughter, insights, inspirations to keep the reader reading. The writer basically imagines the prose as new to themselves and writes to entertain and educate themselves. The only way we can know the reader experience is to imagine that it's the first time we've seen the information. Revising is like Groundhog Day. I guess that's my own quote because I got it in brackets. You keep doing it so you get it right. Signs of a writer likely to go on and be published are likes to revise and makes causality built into his fiction stories. Causality is what the audience shows up for. Yeah, which means writing with volition, which means writing like Ayn Rand had said, what she calls the romantic realism style, that you're seated in contemporary times and realistic situations, and the characters have volition, the will, the ability to change their fate based on their choices and what they do. What is funny? Surprise is essential to almost all comedy. Benign violations, an ill-equipped, relatable character who doesn't give up. That's like Don Quixote. Okay. He says, satire is the highest category of humor and requires the author to be hyper-literate. Satire is more memorable than most other humor because it has a subtext with additional meaning. That's actually pretty much true. Like Jonathan Swift writing Gulliver's Travels. Irony has extreme opposites and hyperbole, and the exaggeration has to be big enough that you're sure the reader gets the joke. Okay. Now we're going to talk about another person from history, Savanarola. Savanarola was the monk from the Renaissance Italy in Florence, and he was a Dominican, the Black Friars, and a lot of people in Florence loved him. Okay. Botticelli, Michelangelo, they go to all his talks, and Botticelli even burned some of his paintings with this idea of the bonfire of the vanities, get rid of trivialities. This idea that Florence was being punished for their sins by being invaded by the French. Okay, so Savanarola, in my opinion, was kind of a crazy pain in the ass, but why do I bring him up at all? Because there's this idea taught in the public schools that, the Italian Renaissance was sort of anti-Christian, that it was really just a throwback, the beginning of neoclassicism, this giant emphasis on the Greeks and Romans. And yeah, they did enjoy the Greeks and Romans, like the Medicis, paid Marcello Ficino and Pico della Mirandola to study Plato and the other ancient Greeks and Romans. But the Italian Renaissance was still Catholic Italy, okay? One of the Medicis became a pope, okay? That's what I mean by, Botticelli, the greatest artist who worked for the Medicis, he burned some of his paintings, which is stupid, after some of the Savanarola speeches. That's how intensely religious it was. It was very intensely religious. Michelangelo was a member of one of these religious orders. It was intensely religious, Italy. Okay, so that was, I think, the main point I wanted to make about Savonarola. Okay. Luther, by the way, said Savanarola was a saint. Okay, now Dorothy Sayers. She was an English writer, and she did a translation of Dante's Divine Comedy into English. Jacques Barson, who wrote Dawn to Decadence, the French guy, he loved her. If we are to produce a society of educated people fitted to preserve their intellectual freedom amid the complex pressures of our modern society, we must turn back the wheel of progress about 400 or 500 years to the point at which education began to lose sight of its true object, towards the Middle Ages. Yeah, you'd be pretty impressed. I've been reading about Thomas Aquinas and the scholasticism school and the way they would have a question. They would read all the previous scholars on it, and then they would add their own thoughts on it and have a debate. Abelard, the Aristotelian, they did some pretty serious debating, and they would study what was known and then have a debate on it. And so they were really pushing education, not just memorization. I was pretty impressed by them. That's why the Renaissance happened in Italy. That's why it happened in Europe. That's why it did not happen anywhere else. Most places don't have free speech. Most places have a dictator who says, do as I say or I'll kick your ass. Doesn't want any innovation or anything. Okay, when people try to innovate, they just get crushed down. That's how it is. Like, look at China, the Mandarins. You try to develop metallurgy, crushed down. Gunpowder, crushed down. New ships, crushed down. Paper, printing, crushed down. Okay. It was in Christian Europe where innovation was allowed. It was not allowed in other places. Okay. All right. What does she say next? She says, a society in which consumption is artificially stimulated in order to keep production going is a society founded on trash and waste. And such a society is a house built on sand. The modern boy and girl are taught more subjects, but does that mean they know more? No. We talked about that before. Public school is designed to make you forget everything. The sole true end in education is simply this, to teach the man how to learn for themselves. And whatever instruction fails to do this is effort spent in vain. Yeah, a good education makes you want to read more. Okay, the best thing I got from my father was he's reading all the time, so it made me want to read all the time. Okay, and then I realized you can often solve problems by just doing more reading. Dorothy Sayers, how true it is that men live for things and women for people. That's actually true. Men are a lot more interested in non-living things like cars and hobbies, whatever it might be, fixing a clock, a computer. Women are a lot more interested in people, especially their children, but they're still more people-orientated than men, that is for sure. The only ethical principle which has made science possible is that the truth shall be told all the time. Well, what's the only thing to make people tell the truth? That they believe that they got to answer to God in heaven, okay, at Judgment Day. That gets people to tell the truth. And that they value the other people. The other thing, too, almost all societies from the beginning of time, they're very ethnocentric, and their attitude is, we are the best, everything we do is good, everything the other cultures do is bad, they're a bunch of low-life scumbag barbarians, and as soon as we're strong enough to kick our neighbor's ass, we're going to go kick their ass and steal their stuff, okay? That is how society has been pretty much from the beginning of time all over the world, okay? All this stuff about freedom and stuff, that's pretty unique, okay? And it's also pretty bogus that, everybody tries to say that the white male Christians were racist. Oh, bullshit. Why does everybody want to move to their country and want to move into their cities, okay? Because they're so damn nice. Try moving into the cities of other cultures, okay? They'll say, get the F out of here, okay? Western civilization is the nicest by far. There's nothing even comparable to it, okay? Let's see, what else does she say? She says, you cannot have Christian principles without Christ. It's become increasingly clear because their validity depends on Christ's authority. Yeah, he's the concretization of metaphysics, if you will. It shows you, by example, how to live your life. Christianity is first and foremost a rational explanation of the universe. Yeah, that's why Christianity is the foundation of science. And without Christian ethics, you don't have it. Science came from the Catholic Church. Go ahead and study it. I have studied it in great detail. You will see that that is true. Don't take my word for it. It's well known for many hundreds of years. education meant the Catholic Church. Everybody else in Europe was backward-ass, dumbfuck barbarian, okay? It was the Catholic Church that made the cathedral schools, then the university school system, run by the Pope, funded all these scholars, was very proud of its scholars, promoted them to bishop. Sometimes they became saints. Okay. So anyways, that's Dorothy Sayers. I hope you found that helpful. We'll leave it at that for today.